exceedingly glad to contribute something to the war effort of his country. Then it happened. The tiny radio on the kitchen table almost seemed to jump up and down with the news that morning. The paper boys cried out the headlines, and all the world went agog at the sudden development. A new and terrible bomb had been dropped over a city in Japan. The city was completely destroyed with that one bomb. The threat of more being dropped left no doubt as to the surrender of the enemy. For all practical purposes, the shooting war was over. So this was what 35 knew about when he had spoken so confidently of the end of the war being near. But more than this, Dan knew what they had been making in the big area where he had come so near to losing his life in defense of its secret. That's at Oak Ridge. He thanked God that our nation had gotten it first instead of the enemy. Good evening, sir. We are happy to have you for our prayer meeting tonight. And Dan shook hands with the stranger at the door of his church. Well, I'm really happy to be here, came the reply. And at that sound of the voice, Dan almost dropped his Bible. 35 was so completely disguised that Dan had no idea that it was him until he spoke. Glancing around, Dan asked anxiously, "What brings you to our service tonight?" "My name is Jones," said 35. "I am planning a trip to Washington soon. I have a friend who is very anxious to meet a certain preacher, and I am wondering if you would like to go with me." "Is that in order?" smiled Dan as he pondered what it would mean to meet the head of the Bureau. "Mr. Big feels that he must meet you and spend some time with you. He is arranging a meeting of church leaders at the department building soon, and he thought this would give you a good excuse and also make it possible for you to visit his office without becoming suspicious. 21 plus, you may have to be careful the rest of your life. Even if you do visit, we will have to have some kind of cover for it." At the close of the service, 35 gripped his hand tightly and said, "Reverend, that message was just what I needed. From now on, I am going to obey the Lord and try to make him a good servant." Dan planned his arrival in Washington so he could go directly from the station to the Bureau building. A feeling of excitement came over him as he realized the moment had finally come when he was to meet Mr. Big. Finally, Dan and 35 stood in the anteroom of Mr. Big's office. "We have orders to come right on in," 35 said, and without waiting, pushed his way on into the private office. Now Dan stood in the office of the man whom he had admired for many years for his devotion to America and its protection. The big man arose from behind the desk and came around it and made directly for Dan. "So this is 21 plus," and he laughed as he said it. "Well, you don't look like anyone to be afraid of," and he laughed even more. "The reports have come in here have made you sound like some ferocious character that could just eat up anything that crossed your path. But you look like a pretty decent chap." Dan laughed with him and felt at ease almost at once. "Mr. Big," he said, "I am what I am by the grace of God. And if it hadn't been for God's protection, you would never have gotten the first good report about me. So if I have been able to do anything, please give all the credit to the Lord." Mr. Big tightened his grip on Dan's hand and said, "Reverend, that's exactly what 35 and the others have told me about you, that you wanted God to have all the glory. I want you to know I appreciate your spirit, and if it was not for the Lord, we would have lost this battle long ago. Now let's sit down and get acquainted." So the preacher and the head of the Bureau spent more than an hour in friendly conversation. Mr. Big finally said, "Now I must go and you must go, so we had better break this thing up. Is there anything else I can do for you?" "Yes, sir, there is. I have enjoyed this time with you more than I can tell, and I will never forget it. But, sir, in my work, I never visit and leave people without having prayer with them. Would you mind if I had a season of prayer?" The big man slipped his arm around Dan's shoulder and said, "I can't think of anything that I would rather have you do than that. And I don't know anyone that I would rather have to pray for me." Together, the head of the Bureau, two of his most trusted agents, and the Reverend spy knelt in the private office of the most revered man in America's legal history and spent some minutes in earnest prayer to God. There was a bond made that was never to be completely broken until death took the fore. Dan never forgot the day he spent in Washington at the Bureau, nor the season of prayer in Mr. Biggs' office.
Wow.